Okay, we're now moving on to a panel session on the automotive sector, which includes Act 2 from Shorten Redmond, which I'm sure you've all been looking forward to since lunchtime. Joachim's going to begin with a 5-minute presentation on the work he's been leading on the automotive sector within CSEP. So I will hand straight over to you if you could do an introduction and to run us through that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to give some introduction remarks. So first of all, I wanted to talk about the automotive sector, which is a traditional sector existing since more than 100 years, but currently this sector is in a massive transformation. In terms of the magnitude of the sector, it's in terms of value of trade in goods, the largest number one position in the UK. At least it was in 2024, and it generates about 25 billion pounds of value to the UK economy, and has more than 150,000 people directly engaged in the automotive manufacturing process, and close to 1 million that are in the wider automotive sector engaged. So more recently, in particular this year, we had a lot of disruptions in this sector. Most likely the biggest disruption were the tariffs that the US government imposed to many countries, which affected in particular the automotive sector. Of course, there were negotiations, and I think the UK came out in a quite moderate way compared to other nations, but still it was very disruptive to the sector. Another big problem at the moment, as you heard about rare earth restrictions from China, national security concerns, chip exports are limited from US to China. China limits their rare earth exports. We have restrictions, for example, in data from China to outside China, and that basically leads to many problems that the sector has to solve. And then the transformation takes place in particular in AI and electrification and batteries, which means that the R&D activities are shifting to those clusters where the most knowledge is being generated. And obviously in AI, we have a lot of R&D activities in the US in terms of battery development in China. So how do we basically keep those critical knowledge clusters in the UK? One interesting number I want to give you is, if you look in particular into the third quarter of 2025 in Silicon Valley investments, there were 111 billion US dollars invested in scale-up investments. And of those, 93% went into AI. And if we look at AI in automotive, I think today was announced that Waymo is bringing robotaxis to London, which is quite remarkable. We look at AI, we have different segments of AI that that are relevant for the automotive sector, in particular what is called physical AI. And I think we should grasp this opportunity to basically bring some of these investments into the UK. Another important topic is that the automotive sector is shifting from a mechanical-centric industry into a software-centric industry. And there's the term software development vehicle, or SDV. There are significant value-add opportunities linked to developing an SDV strategy. And I think we are investigating this currently in CSEP in more detail. But what is also very important, that we are looking at the consumer behavior. At the moment, the consumer is still used to use a car in a traditional way. You park the car, it's many hours unused. How do we basically train the consumer to be more mindful in terms when it comes to waste of space and energy? So do we really need a big battery when we just drive short distances? Do we need to clutter the roads with parked cars? And this is directly linked to the consumer behavior. In terms of the business models, I think we have a lot of interesting opportunities to explore in more detail. It's not just about selling the car and make a margin on it. It is about exploring how can we explore automated parking and charging. How can we use AI when it comes to driving basically with a disengaged human, and how can we use the technology on demand in fleet models. The major challenges right now is that I read that in 1972, we had the largest production rate of cars of close to 2 million. Right now, it's under 1 million. That means we have a decrease in domestic vehicle production, which seems to be ongoing. There is obviously the big question whether UK innovations, in particular in physical AI, could plug into the global supply chain. And I think we hear more from Sean Desmond about this in a minute. And then the other topic is how can we provide and attract sufficient innovation capital from the private sector to team up with the scale-up companies and complement government engagement. And last but not least is how can we make sure that business models that can create value that are linked to fleet operation can compensate to the shrinking margins and volume in the traditional automotive manufacturing. So that's my introduction.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to ask the panel to give themselves a quick introduction or reintroduction.
Sean Redmond, president of Silicon Catalyst. We incubate, accelerate, and invest in semiconductor startups. We've looked at nearly 2,000 worldwide, helped create over 150.
Afternoon, everybody. Siddartha Khastgir. I'm a professor at WMG at University of Warwick. I lead the Safe Autonomy research and also wear a few hats with the Department for Transport as a member of the Science Advisory Council for the DFT. No, I don't think so. Okay.
Hello, my name is Robert Shorten. Hello, my name is Robert Shorten. I'm a professor of cyber-physical systems and head of school at Dyson School of Design Engineering. I'm also ex-IBM research and ex-Mercedes-Benz research.
Okay, thank you. So Siddartha, the first question we put to you is, with the declining production in the automotive sector in the UK, what do you think the challenges are for encouraging those close to entering the workforce to picking that as a career path?
Thank you for that question. Actually, I think it's a very pertinent question because we do a lot of work with school children and university graduates with some of the work at Warwick. And one of the things that I've found is as Brits, we are very good in articulating the doom and gloom, but we're not very good in articulating the positive aspects and the opportunities that offer. I'm a big believer of the concept that positive emotion trumps negative emotion, and the young generation is looking at how can they change the world. And I don't think we're telling a story, and we're not very good, especially the engineering community is not very good at telling the story of how we can change the world, especially in space of AI, in space of space technology. And I think that's where a systemic shift needs to happen in the way the community interacts with the younger generation. So rather than focusing on, yes, you should go into STEM because we have a shortage of skills, it should be, we should go into STEM because, look, you can change the world through STEM. And I think there's a very subtle difference in the messaging, and I think that's not happening. And as a result, we are not being able to inspire children into the ecosystem. I think that's the systemic change I would say we need.
Okay, thank you very much. And Sean, a question to you that might follow on a little bit from that. But this morning we were asking you to draw parallels between Silicon Catalyst and the health tech sector. So if looking at automotive, and essentially the same question again, how do we learn from what you guys have done in the semiconductor sector in something as quite different, I guess, in an automotive sector?
Well, I'd say it's not so different. And building on what Siddartha expressed so eloquently about the automotive industry. So most people don't realize that your car will be the most powerful computer you will ever own. the requirements to deliver fully autonomous driving needs 3 to 5 orders of magnitude more performance than we have in our current compute stacks and AI stacks. So we have redeployed effectively what came out of the GPU world with NVIDIA and the mobile world with Qualcomm into automotive. The opportunities that lie ahead for us in the automotive industry, especially focusing on what we do, semiconductors, is actually not on repurposing the past, but on designing the future. And I think that's where the opportunity for the younger generation and the excitement of being part of that changing the world is quite something. The other aspect, which is quite fascinating in the semiconductor aspects of automotive, is the electrification. So if you look at where most of the world's energy consumption is today, nearly 50% of it goes into electric drives. So electricity consumption, driving electric drives. The ability to improve the efficiency of electric drives is fundamentally in the electronics, in the semiconductors. And the UK leads the world today in compound semiconductors of power, which is where the power semiconductors are developed. So the likes of silicon carbide and gallium nitride, these are compound semiconductors rather than the traditional sort of high performance silicon based semiconductors that we all know and love and have in our mobile phones. The opportunity for innovations in that space are quite remarkable. We have a really good example in the UK where we've had an innovation from a small team in Glasgow that had designed an AI in the circuit loop for power control. And we incubated them through our process in Silicon Catalyst. We introduced them to a teaching customer, one of our strategic partners, who were one of the biggest microcontroller developers in the market today globally. And they recognize the opportunity to co-develop value into their current market in automotive to improve the efficiency of a current generation of products they're already shipping. They can make that product 47% more competitive just by integrating the innovation from the startup into something they already have. And they've leapt on that and taken it to market together. And that's the sort of opportunity you can get when you work with startups as a bigger organization.
Excellent, thank you very much. So Bob, history is littered with wrong predictions of the automotive sector. So what do you think we might be able to learn from that history?
Yeah, I mean the Waymo announcement today is one example, but also Marcus and I were speaking about range extender hybrids, which are supposed to be a thing of the past as being a thing of the future. So I think the fact that it has been so hard to predict what's going to happen in automotive actually illustrates 2 points really clearly. It's an incredibly disruptive sector, right? We tend not to see it because cars kind of look the same. They haven't changed very much in the last 100 years, but actually there's been a big change, especially over the last 15, 20 years. As you said, they're no longer a piece of metal that takes you from A to B. They're much, much more than that. So I think it's an incredibly disruptive sector. I think the fact that it's been hard to predict also illustrates the need for technology, innovation, consumer demand, business model innovation, and also regulatory innovation, the need for that to move in sync, actually, because if any one of those things are out of sync, it tends to stifle adoption. And even though, you know, on a technology level, it's been hard to predict what's going to happen, I think the trend, the big trends in automotive are not that difficult to predict. Cars are far too big. So we need to downsize cars. We need to make them more efficient. That's a huge opportunity for the UK, I believe. You know, the car business is still a volume business. We need to move from volume to value. I think that's a huge opportunity for the UK. And I think this whole area of software-defined vehicle is actually the pathway for unpicking and unlocking a lot of that value. And I think that's something that you know, that's going to be very, very important going forward from a UK perspective. The other thing that's really interesting about the UK, about the automotive industry, is the way it can amplify opportunities, more global opportunities. So, for example, in the area of AI, AI risk is actually amplified in the automotive space because there's a huge appetite for AI in automotive, but actually fundamentally you're talking about a large, heavy piece of metal that can do a lot of damage. They usually have a big battery, so there's a lot of energy, which is also very, very dangerous. So the whole area of AI assurance, I think, is an area that's really been driven very, very strongly from the automotive sector. The other area that I think is really coming to fore as in the automotive sector is this need not just to develop new skills, but to absorb skills. If you look globally at the countries that are doing best in the automotive sector, they're those countries that can absorb and have an appetite for absorbing new skills really, really quickly. And I think in Europe we have lagged behind, I think, in that area. So and I suppose the other area which I think is really highlighted by the inability to predict is the opportunity to have a regulatory sandbox in the UK. I think to create malleable regulation that allows us to experiment and to explore new ideas, I think is a real opportunity for the UK that doesn't exist elsewhere. So,
Okay. Thank you very much. I think I'm going to go to the audience quite early with questions because we keep running out of considered lots of hands wanting to go up in previous sessions. So ask the audience for any questions. If not, I have a whole load of other questions I can ask the panel, so they're not going to get let off.
Yes, obviously a really important sector for the UK. Could the panel give some views on what you think, well, firstly, how you think the UK rates in terms of competitiveness to other countries, where it sits in the rankings, and secondly, what are the critical things for maintaining or accelerating competitiveness?
Yeah, so
Always
maybe
gotta-
I
you go for
can
that first?
let me maybe start with the ranking in terms of electrification and reaching the emission goals. I think the UK is in a relatively good position compared to other countries. The problem that we had in the electrification and sustainability goals is a lack of consumer demand. And consumer demand can be stimulated, obviously, with incentives. But nevertheless, the UK is in a relatively good position in this. I have another concern, which I raised a little bit in my slides, was that this change of the consumer behavior to use mobility as a service in fleets. This is where and this is also what we found in the report. The UK is very good in strategy, but they are not very good at the scaling side. So they have a few trials, they have some, let's say, interesting innovation projects, but when it comes to the scaling, and you mentioned that also in your earlier remarks, that's where the problem is. So if we have now the announcement we mentioned with Waymo bringing a robotaxi fleet to London, this is a good sign that others take us serious. As a big company says, this is the first place in Europe where I go. And what I know from my different research activities is that the big problem at the moment for robotaxi operators in Europe is that in every city, in every village, they have to start again from scratch. There's new discussions, what the problems are, and there are hurdles to scale, which comes back to the regulatory sandboxes. So if we have a very good regulatory sandbox, if we have these big players coming, and then if we can scale this up with innovative smaller companies in UK, then we have a formula to win. And I think we have the opportunity. The competition is very clear where it is. It's in the US and it is in China. These are the big competitors. If those two markets can see the UK as an ally, then we have a really good chance, I think. So that's my personal opinion.
Can I just add?
Yeah,
to that?
yeah.
I think I'll come back to the fact that I think the UK needs a slight cultural change. Don't get me wrong, I love the UK. I'm an Indian national, but I owe the UK a lot. I think we need to move away from this hesitancy of picking winners. And I think when it comes to mega trends, you have to pick winners. And I'll give you an example of what you can gain when you pick winners. So if the UK government invested in the Tata Group company Agratas to bring a battery gigafactory in the UK, that was actually, in a sense, you're picking a winner. You're picking the Tata Group to establish that in the UK. And I think as a result of that, you've got whole supply chain, the employment being created. As a result of that, you're creating a gigafactory in the UK. If you didn't pick a winner and you just said, oh, bid into a Faraday Institution grant program, go through the bureaucracy of this and that, nothing would happen. So when it comes to the mega trends like electrification or AI, you have to take a punt and pick a winner. Obviously, it has to be an educated punt and educated choice, but you have to do it. You cannot not do it because A, the competition is too much. China is moving at what they call as China speed. So you need to move away from this not picking winners culture, especially for mega trends.
Just to add to that, 50% of the value of any vehicle is the electronics in it, right? So, and something we don't celebrate enough is that the processing power in most vehicles comes from a company in the UK, which is the largest technology company created in the whole of the European base in the last 40 years, and that company's ARM. So we've actually, when you look at and compare us to the US, who have created 116 $10 billion plus technology companies in the last 40 years, the whole of Europe created 6. The largest of those is ARM. So at least in the UK, we created 2. So ARM and Sage. But fundamentally, we should celebrate that success because in automotive electronics and semiconductors, ARM is the design of choice in every vehicle today. It's a UK headquartered company and it has huge numbers of staff. It has several thousand people being employed here across Cambridge and Manchester and Bristol. So all from a turkey barn in Swaffham.
We'll go to the middle there and then to Owen after that.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carlos Lopez from Institute for Manufacturing at Cambridge. I think just going back to the point of competition, obviously you mentioned that China coming in. We still don't yet understand the effect of Chinese competition in Europe and specifically in the UK. It's going to come. We know the export numbers of China in the last 4 years are impressive. They have never exported as many cars as now. So the question is the UK industry in crisis? Is European industry in crisis? Are we in emergency mode because the Chinese competition is coming?
I think if I may just make a comment here, so the competition is for me a relative term here because you can see them as a competition in terms of eating market share, but you also need to see what solutions are they using. If they only use Chinese technology and we have no involvement in this, that's not good. But you mentioned ARM, but if in these Chinese vehicles are ARM processors, maybe we can see that also as a partnering opportunity. So I would not. So the key question is: are they generating value in the UK? Are they doing R&D? Are they engaging with the UK supply chain? Are they creating value here, or are just dumping their products? That is a key question in terms of what does it mean. Competition can also be healthy, right?
We had this conversation about Nissan and Honda about 20 years ago.
Yes.
Can I add to that? So I was at a Financial Times event and John Elkann, the chairman of Stellantis, was there. And he said a phrase which has stuck with me all along for the last year. He said, we need to stop being scared of China and we need to take inspiration from China. And I think that's very, very pertinent in today's world. That I think China will come. So now you can choose to actually work with them or take inspiration with them or just be scared. I'll give you a very interesting statistic just came to my mind right now. So if you look at the automotive OEMs, the UK hasn't created a new OEM in the past 20 years. We have lost established OEMs who've shut down manufacturing. US has created Tesla in the last 20 years, Rivian. There's a whole lot of Chinese OEMs that have got created in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
We haven't created a new OEM here. And it's not that trivial, but other countries have done that. Europe also hasn't done that. So it's not like UK is worse off than Europe. But there's a trend here that there are countries and regions that can create a new OEM, which is not trivial, and the regions who cannot. And what does it take to create a new OEM? And that's the inspiration that we can take from China. How can a mobile phone supplier become an OEM? How can Xiaomi, who develops mobile phones, turn into an automotive OEM suddenly in the matter of years? I think that's what we need to learn.
Red was back to
Do you want to say one last thing?
Yeah, just one last thing. The point I would make is that, well, 2 points. I think the competition comment is definitely relevant, but there's a huge geopolitical element to this also. You know, there is the need for sovereign UK or European automotive industry because of the risks that I mentioned earlier. So that is something that we cannot forget. And then I would say a lot of the new entries into the market, they're very traditional models. They're volume-based models. They are, there's nobody really has cracked the transition from volume to value. And even the small vehicle categories is a vehicle category that's wide open, and a huge opportunity right now, right here for the UK, I believe.
Thank you. Good Owen.
Owen Jackson, Director of the Imperial Policy Forum. David Willits earlier warned us to avoid a situation where we have a regulatory environment which fails to take account of some of the system-wide balancing acts that a good regulatory environment requires. You talked about the sandbox. It feels to me that automotive is a sector that's ripe for some of these balancing acts, whether it's size versus safety or pedestrian versus passenger type, when we're talking about AI. So are we actually set up right now? Is the regulation and the regulatory environment able to deal with some of those things that are going to be quite difficult balancing acts?
I think if I may just quickly talk about two regulatory regimes that are, in my opinion, in particular relevant. The one is the emission regulations. There, the big question was, and I have seen this in continental Europe, was we have a established ICE community with many jobs on it. And right now, there is a softening of the regulatory regime on the CO2 emissions. And it looks like the EU will basically soften it. Right? Why is that? Because two factors. The one is lack of consumer demand. That was one obvious reason. And the other was what are we doing with employees that are affected by it that could lose their jobs? So these are the two concerns. So interesting enough, China does not have regulatory a regime around CO2 emissions. They didn't say until 2035 you are not allowed in China to sell an ICE vehicle. They just let the market play. And it's similar, US, same direction, let the market play. So if you are using regulatory constraints, you can kill the markets, and there's a problem. The second is the AI and the automation regulation. Here, the key question is, are we concerned about potential fatalities and injuries through automation and basically killing the market? Or are we doing this look and see approach that we know from US and say, okay, let's larger deployments happen, let's see, and basically more on a lower regulation burden, basically, and pro-market approach? This is a big question. I don't have the concrete answer to this, but I think we need to be very careful that we do not kill innovation through regulation. But on the other hand, and I think it was mentioned by the lunch speech, we need to use data to adapt regulation. If we have evidence from the data that we need to make some changes, we need to have a good mechanism to adapt the regulation. And then we're in good shape, I think, if we have that mechanism.
Thank you, Joachim. I think that is a good point to stop. There's one last question. Is that Mike sticking his hand up? Go on, have the last question, Mike. You're only stopping people from having a cup of coffee.
A very simple question. Mike Short, Chair of UK Telecoms Labs. I felt the reference to connectivity in the report was interesting, but I'm not sure you've actually explored the full depth of what connectivity could bring to the vehicle of the future. Would any of the panelists like to say a little bit more about what connected cars, connected freight could really deliver? It's not just an electronic story, it's much more of a connected system story in the digital economy.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
so I'm going to go to just Siddartha with this one
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it kind of
yeah.
links into the follow-on work that
Yes,
Warwick are
yes,
going to be
yes,
doing.
yes,
So I
yes.
think in that context, it would be good to have
And then
your answer.
Joachim can add to that.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. You first. Go ahead.
Very
Siddartha.
quickly, I think connectivity is a technology that has always had promise, but hasn't realized that promise. So when we speak to the OEM, especially, they are open to have it as a good to have, but they don't want to depend on it for actual operation, especially when it comes to automated vehicles. We've had the conversations with all the German OEMs in this space, and they don't want to depend on connectivity to perform anything. Having said that, there are a lot of benefits of connectivity that haven't realized as a result of the good to have aspects also, from fuel efficiency, from the traffic throughput, and so on and so forth. And it's just one of those things that every OEM has worked within its own silo. And for connectivity to work, you need multiple OEMs to talk to each other. You need the infrastructure to actually guarantee a level of quality. So I had conversations with Ofcom, and they would say, we will have 98%, but we can't guarantee you the latency and the coverage of that. And you can't work or design a system with those kind of statements. And so I think that's the challenge that we are seeing from an OEM perspective. Having said that, there are some use cases that I absolutely believe is possible, but we haven't been able to shine light on those use cases, and OEM haven't prioritized them.
So one sentence maybe. I think V2X will play a big role, and to use signals that you get from the infrastructure to keep the fleet operation safer will be a big future topic. So the V2X will, in my opinion, become much more important. So we'll keep it short so that you are not running out of time.
So we're going to wrap it up there. Bob has written a book on this.
Oh.
So if you want to have a chat with him in the coffee break, please do. Thank you very much. Are we moving on to the coffee break now? Yes. Okay. Can you just let us know what time we need to be back?
Yes, it'll be a sort of short 20-minute or so coffee break back in the council room upstairs. So we'll rush you back down when we're ready to bring you back. But round of applause for the panel. Thank you.